This is a restored field recording from the Black Creek Wilderness, compiled from fragmented notes, corrupted audio, and a partially recovered video log. Welcome to the Black Creek Archives. I didn't intend to record a third entry. I thought maybe the footsteps outside my cabin would fade on their own. I thought ignoring them would make them stop. But after the doorknob incident, after the scratching beneath the floorboards, after hearing that whisper on the camera footage, I realized something. This wasn't leaving. If anything, it was getting closer. And on the night this entry was recorded, I discovered that whatever followed me home wasn't acting alone. Day 1. Gaps in the trees. The first thing I noticed were the trees, not the footsteps, not the crawl space scratching, not the whispering distortion on the camera. The trees, specifically the gaps between them. I grew up around woods. I know how trees settle, how branches fall, how shadows stretch differently through the day. But this was wrong. Every morning for 4 days, the tree line behind my cabin wasn't the same as the night before. It was subtle at first, a tree that seemed farther left, a small opening that hadn't existed, a stump that appeared where none had been. I told myself I was imagining it. But on the 5th morning, I wasn't imagining anything, because an entire pine, a full-grown one, stood 3 feet closer to my cabin than it had the day before. 3 feet. Trees don't do that. Not even in storms. Not silently. Not overnight. And definitely not toward a structure. That's when I started documenting everything. Night 1. The branches. I set up another camera outside. This time facing the tree line. I didn't sleep. I sat up in my chair, staring out the back window, every light off, letting the moon be my only source of clarity. Around 1:50 a.m., I heard it. Not footsteps, not scratching, but shifting. Branches brushing against each other. Trunks groaning softly, as if swaying in wind that wasn't there. Pine needles raining down in small, deliberate bursts. I leaned closer to the window. Nothing moved. But the sound grew louder, and then, crack. A thick branch snapped off a tree and fell, right at the base of the cabin wall. I jumped, but when I looked at the camera footage the next morning, the branch was already on the ground before it snapped, as if something had placed it there first, and the sound was added later. Night 2. The moving tree line, camera distortion log. This part came from the restored footage. Around 2:13 a.m., the camera's image flickered. The tree line blurred as if melting into itself. Pixels dragged like dripping wax. Then, for 3 frames, the trees in the background leaned forward, not swayed, not bent, not blown by wind. They leaned, all at the same angle, toward the cabin, as if listening. Then the image cut out completely. The recording resumed 9 minutes later. When it did, the trees were noticeably closer to the camera, at least a foot. No sound, no footsteps, no movement captured, just the first signs of the forest closing in. Night 3. The circle. I woke at 2:17 a.m., but not from footsteps, not from scratching, from silence. The kind of silence that wraps around a place like a shroud. No wind, no insects, no owls, not even distant branches settling. I sat up in bed and noticed something strange. My room was darker than usual. No moonlight. I walked to the window and froze. The trees were only 10 feet from my cabin door. They had moved farther than any previous night and arranged themselves in a perfect half circle around the clearing. Not random, not natural, organized, like they were forming a barrier or a boundary. Then the sound started, low, deep, a groaning vibration travelling through the trunks. A hum felt more than heard. I pointed my flashlight at the nearest tree and saw something carved into the bark. A symbol, a spiral with 3 pointed branches. Not fresh, not old, somewhere in between. But the strangest part, there were no tool marks, no chisel lines, no blade cuts. It was as if the bark had grown into the symbol. I backed away from the window, and that's when the trees pivoted, just slightly, all at once. Turning to face my cabin, turning to face me, I stumbled, fell against the wall, shut the curtains. I didn't open them again until sunrise. When I did, the circle was gone. The trees were back where they had always been, except one pine branch had been placed on my doorstep, fresh, sticky with sap. Again. Night 4. The tapping. This was the worst night so far. I was lying in bed, the camera outside rolling, every light off. Around 2:17 a.m, the tapping began. It wasn't on the door. It wasn't on the wall. It came from above. A soft tapping on the roof, but not with fingers, not with claws, with something wooden. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, steady. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. I aimed it at the roof. Nothing. I shined it at the tree line. Nothing. Then I aimed it up, past the roof, toward the tall pines surrounding the clearing, and I saw it. The tops of the trees were leaning inward, all of them, their highest branches aiming straight toward my cabin, like a ring of enormous figures bowing their heads. I ran back inside, locked every door, every window. The tapping continued, then shifted. The taps travelled across the roof, to the edge, down the wall, and stopped inches from the window. I held my breath, and for the first time, I heard breathing. Not human, not animal. Something wrong, like air pulled through hollow wood. I dropped the flashlight. When I picked it back up and looked out the window, the trees were standing upright again, perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. Final observation. They followed me long before the cabin. This morning, while checking the footage, I noticed something I hadn't before. In the background of a video I recorded years ago, a clip from my old hiking trip, the same symbol appears carved into a tree, the spiral, with the 3 pointed branches, the same one outside my cabin now. This was long before the abandoned cabin, long before the footsteps, long before I ever knew about Black Creek, which means this didn't follow me home. It was already there. It always was. And whatever lives in those woods isn't done with me. I'm preparing another camera setup tonight. If the trees move again, if the circle forms, if I hear that tapping, I'll document it in the next entry, if I can. If you've seen the trees watching you, you're not alone. The forest remembers. Subscribe to Black Creek Archives for the next recovered entry before the woods move again.